Starfield is a game developed by Bethesda, a studio that brought us classic games such as Skyrim and Fallout New Vegas, games that to this day are still considered some of Bethesda's best, and for good reason. However, some of their recent releases haven't really captured the fanbase in the same way. Fallout 76 wasn't received well at all and has only started to see a big influx of players since the release of the Fallout TV show, and the same can be said for Fallout 4. So in 2018, Bethesda announced a new IP, Starfield.
We have also been working on a brand new next generation single player game. But this one is in an all new epic franchise. Our first wholly original franchise in 25 years. We're excited to announce our next adventure.
You gotta be kidding me. The front.
Next generation single player game. Next generation single player game. All of this just works.
Welcome to the Galbank Archives. May I see your credentials, please?
It got trademarked in 2013 and development on it began in 2016. However, Todd Howard wanted to make this game for the last 20 or so years. And it was supposed to be this big space game that allowed players to visit and explore over 1,000 different planets and serve as the ultimate space exploration game. The magnum opus of Bethesda and Todd Howard. In this video, I want to go over the main reasons why I think the game can be considered a failure in terms of what it was trying to achieve. Now, I want to start off by saying I don't hate Starfield, and upon release I was actually really excited to try it out. I've always wanted a space RPG game with a dense world and rewarding exploration, similar to what other Bethesda games have offered. I tried Star Citizen and No Man's Sky, but neither of them quite scratched that itch for me. So to say that I went into this game wanting it to fail or expecting it to be bad is just not true. I love RPG games. I loved Skyrim and even Fallout 4 with all the flaws and issues it had. So I went into Starfield with an open mind, expecting a truly next generation game, because after all that is what our God and Saviour Todd Howard promised us.
Next generation single player game.
After all, this was supposed to be a culmination of every good thing Bethesda has done up to this point. But upon playing the game for over 60 hours, that itch was still there. Naturally, as it is a Bethesda game, Starfield on launch was filled with bugs, glitches, and the game felt like you were running it on a Nintendo 3DS. I think we now understand why it was locked at 30 FPS on consoles. Even people with 4090s and the best PC systems didn't have the smoothest experience possible. But like I said, this was a Bethesda game and it's what is expected from them. Weirdly, if the game didn't have them, it wouldn't feel like a Bethesda game after all. However, it did have a ton of bugs, a lot more than many people expected. And I'm not trying to defend Bethesda in any sort of way here by saying it's sort of embedded into their games. I'm just saying that some bugs and glitches actually added a little bit more charm to games like Skyrim and Fallout 4 in a way. As always though, the modding community were onto it straight away and a DLSS mod was released that helped out with these performance issues. Mods is something I will talk about a bit more in depth later on in this video. You could also change some things using console commands to improve the performance, but the fact this game, which was in development for such a long time, ran so poorly and had so many technical issues, just didn't spell good things for other aspects of the game. The graphics overall were good, especially on specific planets that had some really amazing lighting. However, the NPCs sometimes looked like wax statues with their faces slowly melting off. The graphics weren't something I was blown away by. Bethesda games have never really been known for their graphical fidelity, and anyway, graphics and a good game have no correlation. I would much rather sacrifice amazing graphics for a fun gameplay loop, or extremely dense worlds with outstanding exploration. I see graphics as a cherry on top, it just adds to an already great product. Starfield for me graphically wise is okay, it doesn't look bad at all, but it never really blew me away in a way that maybe Cyberpunk or Red Dead Redemption 2 did. It was created on the Creation Engine 2, and my worry about that is that it probably won't age well. None of Bethesda's games do, unless you have a ton of mods installed for them. Honestly, I hope that for Elder Scrolls 6 they finally decide to move to a different engine, and hopefully it'll stop the games looking like the PS3 titles. But what was the game actually like when you ignore all the glitches, bugs and the choppy performance? Well, not great. Let's start with the story, and more specifically the first impression the game gives to players. After all, first impressions are everything, and Starfield falls flat in that department in my opinion. You start the game off as an Argos extractor and end up finding a fragment. As always, there's a lot of dialogue to start with and you get the chance to create your character. After around 20 minutes you finally get into your first bit of combat. However, it's not a big event like Skyrim where the dragon comes swooping down to save you from getting beheaded, or like Fallout 4 where they kill your wife. Instead, it's just some pirates that followed a member of a constellation group, and it doesn't grip you in the same way Skyrim or Fallout 4 did. The story itself is very lackluster too. The premise of the story is to go and find missing artifacts. You're told to go to a planet and retrieve the artifact, and honestly there isn't much more to it. Personally, I found faction missions a lot more interesting and actually offered some unique missions. I don't think it's a good thing that I found myself enjoying the side quests more than the main story. At one point I actually forgot about the main story, and once I got back around to finishing it, I wasn't enjoying the game as much as I was before. I do think it's important to have really good side quests and missions outside of your main story, but the main story should be the focal part of your game, and not the secondary or third part, and if that's the case, I think that's an issue. The dialogue is also very bloated. I appreciate the amount of options offered with each conversation, but a lot of the time I found myself skipping through a lot of it because of how slow the delivery actually was. Exploration was something that I was excited for the most when I first saw the gameplay reveal for Starfield. The thought of being able to jump in your ship, travel to a planet and explore the different things it has to offer, such as enemies, some sort of dungeons and more, was what got me most excited for the game when I first saw it. And although you were able to do some of these things, it wasn't to the extent I and many other people had hoped for. Space exploration was non-existent. You could only fly around the orbit of the planet, but there was no actual reason to unless you were fighting against pirates or boarding other ships. All space exploration had to offer was just getting from one planet to the other through using fast travel. You also can't fly around the actual planet, which is a shame because it would mean that if you were flying down onto the planet and something caught your eye, you would have been able to fly over and investigate that area. Instead, you have to pick a landing zone and then go through a cutscene. You have no freedom of actually flying around the planet and going wherever you want, although that's what was said. You aren't able to freely travel in space like you can in No Man's Sky or Star Citizen, and for a game that costs $200 million to develop, you'd think such a feature would be available. It would add depth and immersion to the experience, but instead all that is taken away and replaced with fast travel and a loading screen. And exploration once you're on a planet is honestly not much better. Once you've chosen your landing zone and you've gone through the cutscene of loading, your only way to traverse planets is on foot. You have no other ways of transport. Having to run everywhere quickly becomes very mundane, and feels like more of a chore rather than something that is just part of exploring. I still to this day have no idea and can't comprehend why they wouldn't give us a vehicle to use for moving around on these planets. It could be something like a speeder, something similar from the Star Wars universe, or a 4x4, or just some sort of bike. We could then store them in our ships and use them when we land. It would make moving around these planets a lot quicker and just more efficient. There is nothing fun about having to run for several minutes from your ship to an objective. There is even an option to fast travel back to your ship instead of running back, which I used more often than I thought because honestly running back was boring. But if players have the ability to use vehicles, there would be no need for that fast travel options. You can use your jump boost to make it somewhat more bearable, or when you acquire the gravity dash, that can also help. But simply allowing us to use a vehicle would just make more sense. But then again, there is nothing to actually explore in these locations. You have a few outposts with some enemies, and that's about it really. It doesn't encourage exploration in the same way Skyrim did, or games like Elden Ring and Red Dead Redemption do. There is no cool NPCs that will give you some sort of side quest. It doesn't have a lot of caves or dungeons, instead it's just outposts. The cool thing about games like Skyrim and Elden Ring and The Witcher 3 is that a lot of the times when I was on my way to the main objective, I would get sidetracked because I would see a cave or I would stop by an interesting POI and maybe start some unique side quest. It was what made them games stand out to me, the freedom they offered and how they encouraged exploration. I never used fast travel in those games because I felt like I would miss out on something cool. I enjoyed the journey to the objective. In Starfield, none of that is there. You land on a planet and it has a few outposts and that's about it. There is nothing interesting to find. The game doesn't reward curiosity and doesn't encourage it either. It's a loop of fast travel to a planet, do what you need to do and fast travel back. Having so many planets and locations in the game has actually harmed it. Instead of having 1000 procedurally generated planets, it would have been better to maybe make 10 or so planets and make them more detailed and pack a bunch of content into them instead. Starfield has got a sense of scale, but it doesn't really matter because that scale is empty. Furthermore, if you run far enough on these locations, you get stopped by invisible walls. So much for going wherever you want. Like I said though, none of these things really matter because there is no need for anyone to go exploring on any of these planets, as they don't offer any meaningful experiences. A major issue the game has, and something that completely breaks the already limited immersion, are loading screens. Loading screens are fucking everywhere, and if you don't have this game on your SSD, then I pity you because you'll probably spend more time in loading screens than actually playing the game. But then again, them loading screens could be more fun than actually playing the game itself. But seriously, nearly every interaction puts you through a loading screen. Board another ship, loading screen. Enter a building, loading screen. Land on a planet, loading screen. Nearly every action has a loading screen. Now imagine if when you try to board an enemy ship in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, you get a loading screen. How annoying would that be? It just takes you out the action, making that experience less seamless and less enjoyable. I feel like they could have hid these loading screens behind some sort of cutscenes, similar to when you enter and leave your seat on your ship. Similar to what Star Wars Outlaws is doing when you leave a planet or land on a planet. It's still a loading screen but is disguised behind a cutscene. It doesn't take away from the immersion as much as a standard loading screen does. Personally, this was one of the biggest annoyances I had with the game. Every action had a loading screen instead of making me want to stay in the game. It felt like it was trying to stop me from playing it even more. Earlier on I briefly mentioned mods. Now Bethesda games and mods go hand in hand. At this point it really seems like Bethesda make a game with a lot of features that are half cooked. I just know that the modding community will make the game better for them. It's part of the reason they actually stopped fixing a lot of the bugs, especially in some of their older titles. The amount of times I've heard that the game gets better with mods when it comes to one of the games is absurd. A game shouldn't be considerably better with mods. Mods should either add more content or simply improve an already amazing experience. The Witcher 3 has a full-fledged mod system in place, but when do you ever hear that the game is better with mods? Personally, I've never heard it. That's because the game is already amazing and mods will only add to that experience, not massively improve it. Now, this isn't just Starfield related, but I'm mentioning it because of the recent controversy surrounding the release of the Creations mod, mainly because it involves paid mods. For a small price of $7, you can get a single NPC bounty target. $7 can nearly get you a battle pass in many other games. Not that I support those either, but it's definitely better value for money. A lot of good mods are free, but a lot are also very pricey, which has led to Starfield being review bombed on Steam yet again. But at least the game is getting mods, so maybe in about 5 years time, if you download over 100 mods, the game will be actually somewhat enjoyable. The combat really isn't all that great either. Is it bad? No. But is it better than any of Bethesda's previous titles? No, it's exactly what I expected it to be like. It's hide behind cover, and shoot or sneak up on someone and get them down with a stealth move. It's nothing innovative or new. There is a decent amount of weapons and gear to choose from though, which I appreciate. Overall though, the actual combat and gameplay are nothing new, and it's a shame to see that no real progress was made in that department, and in some cases you could argue it's somewhat worse. Bethesda games have been on a decline for some time now. A lot of the games only get good after the modern community fixes it for them. They also don't age well because of how outdated their engine is. As Todd Howard famously said, it just works.
All of this just works.
Well, their games don't really work that well anymore. A buggy launch with choppy performance wasn't a great start, but I can't really hold that against them because unfortunately it's become the norm for majority of games to launch in that way now. What really put me off the experience was how they steered away from what made the previous games so good, which was exploration and how you were rewarded for being curious. How on your way to an objective you would find yourself discover a dungeon that would then need you to fight enemies and at the end reward you with some sort of gear. Instead, we had outposts that you would travel to. A lot more could have been done with these locations, but it's hard to do that when you have over 1000 planets in the game. They sacrificed detail and world density for scale. The problem was that scale was empty. It doesn't matter if you have 2000 or 1000 planets if they don't offer anything interesting on them. It's almost as if they thought the bigger we go, the better it will be. On paper, it sounds amazing, but you could pack more content into 10 or 15 carefully designed planets than you can on 1000. Not giving players any means of ground vehicles also hurt the experience. Traversing became boring and, like I said, simply felt like a chore. Loading screens were immersion breaking. Having to go through so many of them, and for a lot of the things they simply didn't need one, took you out of the game. Bethesda main stories are never really their strong points, and the side quests always offer a more interesting experience in my opinion. However, the main story in Starfield is probably one of the worst and most boring I've played in a Bethesda game so far. The game has many flaws, and like I said at the start of this video, I don't hate it. I actually enjoyed quite a bit of the game for what it is. It's just disappointing knowing what this game could have been, and with time maybe it will get considerably better. There is a DLC coming out for it this year, and apparently they plan to release more in the coming years. In my opinion, the game needed some more time in the oven, to get rid of so many loading screens and add more depth to the planets. A fair assessment of this game is I would call it average. It doesn't excel in any given thing, but it's also not terrible to the point where you won't have any fun with it. I think a lot of the enjoyment you'll have with it depends on what you're expecting to get out of it. Personally, I wanted a Skyrim in space, and maybe that's on me for having those expectations, because clearly that's not what Starfield was trying to do, but I just can't help to think that if it was Skyrim in space, the game would be a lot more enjoyable and better received. Maybe in a few years' time I'll play it again and my opinion will change, but until then, Starfield for me remains somewhat of a disappointment and a forgettable experience.